This is 𝐶𝐬𝐬𝐬. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Let's Talk Mental Health. So today I'll be your host as we talk about loss, grief, and mental well-being. So today's webinar is embracing loss and navigating grief for better for mental well-being. Today I'm having guests from Pakistan, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. So, as we all know that on a daily basis, we go through grief. It could be a loss of a loved one, a loss of property, a loss of dreams. Either way, we do mourn things that have left us or people that have left us. So, which is why this topic is very important to each and every one of us today. So, before I waste much of your time, I would like to introduce the guests who are with me today. So I'll ask each of the guests to introduce themselves. I'll start with Ms. Ribab. Would you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Rabab Kadir. I'm a clinical psychologist and a corporate trainer. I'm working in this field since 5 years. I'm a certified marriage, family, and couple counselor, trauma therapist, and a certified member of APA and Australia and New Zealand Mental Health Organization.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's nice to have you here today. So the next guest is Dr. Joseph Kayaya. May you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Joseph Kayaya. I am a medical doctor by training, passionate about mental health and people's well-being, the impact of culture on how we carry ourselves, how we process grief, and how we just go through life. So I'm excited to be here and to be part of this great discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Last but not least, Ms. Judy Kennedy, will you please introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. My name is Julie Kennedy. I'm a digital marketer by trade, but I am a mental health advocate by passion, brought on by personal experience. I'm really glad to be here having this conversation with everyone. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you so much for the wonderful introductions, everyone. So we'll start our webinar. So I'd like everyone to pay attention, and if you have questions, you can leave them in the comments so that we can pick them up and discuss them at the end of the webinar. So the first question goes to Ms. Rubab. So how would you define grief, Ms. Rubab? This question is for you. So how would you define grief, and what are
Okay.
some common misconceptions people have about the grieving process?
Okay, so grief is like carrying a heavy backpack of sadness and heartache. Like imagine someone loses his favorite pet, or a best friend moves away from him, right? Imagine the loss, right? It's feel like a deep sense of loss, emptiness. And when you call it a grief, so as a professional criteria for that, that it must be met for labeling it or diagnosing it, that it's a grief, like it's a proper intense sorrow or yelling period, right? For the lost person, you are unable to move forward. It's difficulty to moving on, right? To making a different new relationships, like engaging in new activities. Your daily life get affected, like your sleeping pattern get affected. You get changes in your appetite, your focus, your attention get uh, uh, detract. Right? And if this all symptoms meet the criteria of 6 months, right, you're unable to function, your functioning get difficult, so you can call it a period of grief. People used to think that it's not easy to someone to move on. Yeah, it's very easy to move on. Actually, it depends on individual differences. Actually, it depends on your coping mechanism, your culture, your environment where you are living.
Okay, thank you so much for that definition, Mr. Bob. As I'm sure we've actually known what grief really is. So grief comes when we actually mourn the loss of a loved one, or a pet, or a dream, even. So thank you so much for that definition. The next question goes to Dr. Joseph Kayaya. So this question is yours, Dr. Joseph Kayaya. What are the different stages or phases of grief, and how does understanding them help individuals navigate their grief journey?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sankolani, for those questions. And so there are different stages of grief, and I think after this webinar, I can also just share some links to some of the resources I was looking up on this, as well as some of the reflections that came up and preparing for this conversation. So, with the first bit of dealing with grief is denial. And that's because in the very first phase of the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, the loss of whatever you could have lost that is causing you to walk that path of grief, there's always this feeling that this is not real, it has not happened, maybe it's a dream, pinch me, maybe I'm going to wake up. And then once you go through that process, the next comes anger, right? And that's the thing, like the shock is wearing off. The thought of that is not possible is wearing off. But now you start experiencing these anger moments, anger against life, anger against the experience, could be anger against God, or depending on your spirituality. So this anger could manifest in many different ways. The third stage is bargaining, right? And in terms of bargaining, it's pieces around, okay, this has happened. I've moved from denial. I've gone through the anger process, but now I begin to bargain and start thinking about, okay, maybe if I do this or if I did that, things could have been different. Maybe I wouldn't be here today. Maybe things would have been better, you know? Then from the bargaining stage, you move towards the depression stage. And that's where now the reality has sunk in. It's clear that this person is not coming back. This job is not coming back. The pet is gone and gone for good. The friendship is gone sour, or maybe it's the business that has dwindled and it's actually closing down. So now the reality has set in, and then in trying to adjust to that reality, people can fall into depression and lose interest in different aspects of life, lose interest in different activities around them. They just become a depressed person. And then the fifth stage is acceptance. Acceptance is where now we've settled in the fact that the grief is here, the loss has happened, nothing is going to change. I cannot move on from this grief, but I can move forward with the grief. So we begin to pick ourselves up, and we then begin to get better. And so people can do different things at different stages. And I think everybody should be given an opportunity to walk through these different stages. These stages are not stages that are in one direction. One person can move from stage 1 to stage 2 and fall back into stage 1. But the idea is to ensure that as you walk through the stages, we are consistently walking towards a place where we come to acceptance. We are coming to terms with the fact on the table, and we are coming to terms with the grief. We're coming to terms with the loss. Getting the support that we need to actually get to the end of the discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Joseph Kayaya. I'm sure we've actually seen the stages of grief, and why it is important to know which stage you are at with your grief in order to move forward. So the next question goes to Ms. Julie Kennedy. So grief is a deeply personal experience, and everyone grieves differently. What are some healthy coping mechanisms individuals can employ to process their grief effectively?
Yes, so I think you mentioned something that's really important in that grief is it's a very individual process, and it's different for everyone. But a few things that I guess people could try and employ in the process is it's just acknowledging emotion, whatever it is that you're feeling, whether it be sadness, whether it be pain, whatever that feeling is, it's to know that it's okay to actually feel that emotion. You don't have to fear it. You don't have to push it away. Just embrace it and let yourself feel it, because once you feel the emotions, then you can start to let them go. The next very important thing is definitely seeking support. So this can be whether it be mental health professionals, whether it be family or close friends. Any of those is just very important during that stage, because it's someone that you can talk to, someone that you can express those emotions that we just talked about, tell them how you feel, someone that'll listen to you without judging and just, help you to cope with those feelings. And then another thing is definitely understanding that you need patience. These things don't just go away. These feelings don't just come and go. It's an ebb and flow of highs and lows while you're processing that grief. So just understanding that you don't have to rush. Healing takes time, and again, it's different for everyone. And then, one last thing is, if it's to do with someone that has passed, something that's very important maybe is perhaps memorializing the loved one. So, creating some type of dedication to someone who's passed, whether it be something as simple as just planting a tree they loved or holding a memorial service. Sometimes that's very important to have people coming together to memorialize someone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think we've actually heard the importance of actually seeking help when you're grieving, because sometimes the emotions are overwhelming and you cannot deal with them on your own. So you actually have to seek help. It could be from a professional or someone in the family or a friend. So thank you so much for that, Miss Judy. So the next question goes back to Miss Rabab. So loss and
Yeah.
grief can have a profound impact on mental well-being. Could
Yeah.
you elaborate on the specific ways grief affects our mental health, and when does grief shift to depression?
As I mentioned before, that we have different symptoms like significant grief always have significant impact on our daily lives, but the intensity of that symptom really depends, really distinguish actually between grief and depression. For example, just imagine if you are losing the ability of playing your favorite game, like someone likes cricket a lot, but due to some injury or anything someone is unable to play it the way he used to play. So this sense of not able to do uh, certain things always give that person. Hello,
Yes, you may continue. We can hear you.
I can't hear anything. Hello.
Uh, you may continue. I think we've lost her. So we'll circle back to her.
Hello.
For now, I would ask Dr. Joseph Kwayaya to give us an answer to this question. Are there any cultural or societal factors that influence the grieving process? How can we create a more inclusive and supportive environment for individuals from diverse backgrounds who are grieving?
Yeah, thank you very much. And this really hits close to home. And as you know, grief is a very personal process, right? It's a very personal process. It's an individual process, like has been said. The first thing for me, in terms of creating an inclusive environment and supporting people of diverse backgrounds, diverse nationalities, diverse social, cultural, religious contexts in terms of dealing with grief, is one thing. Understanding the fact that these emotions are valid, the experiences are valid, the pain is valid. I think starting from that place, knowing that grief in itself is painful as a process, walking through it and carrying it forward and moving forward with it in life is not as easy as saying you can move on, you will be fine. Time heals all wounds. We need to be more supportive. We need to be more patient. We need to defer judgment. We need to defer assumptions. I have heard people in certain settings in our country, for instance, when you have a funeral, they walk up to you and tell you, do not worry, don't lose hope. You will be fine. Time heals all wounds. Or you hear people saying things like, when I lost my father as well 4 years ago, this is what I went through. Don't worry, you'll be fine in no time. I think that in itself is very unfair and not very inclusive. And as much as we are trying to use our experiences as a basis of providing some counsel or support to somebody who is actively grieving and just starting out on their journey, I think it's important to be respectful, to defer judgment, defer assumptions, to understand that people's experiences and emotions are valid. Some of the factors that affect how we navigate the grieving process, it could be religious factors, right? If somebody is a Christian, is a Muslim, is Hindu, they believe in one religion or another, they uphold a certain type of spirituality. That in itself can affect how somebody processes grief. There's cultural factors as well, in terms of depending on where somebody is raised, right? Have you been raised in the Western world? Are you raised in the global East? Are you raised in Africa and deep in Africa? Are you in Zambia? Even in Zambia, where I'm from, different cultures take things differently, right? And so just the culture itself and how I have been raised as an individual, the society that I belong to upholds a certain culture. In our culture, for instance, men are not expected to grieve and cry. You know, like when my father died, I was always constantly told, you are a man now, you have to be strong for your mother and your brothers. You can't be crying like the women. There's no safe space for a man to express grief. That cultural context limited my processing of my father's grief until 3 years later, I literally had to go for therapy and support to actually resolve and process my father's death, because even 3 years later, I had not even had the chance to break down and really live through those experiences of grief when it actually happened. So religious factors are critical, cultural factors are critical, exposure in terms of written material, in terms of training, in terms of education could also be a factor, because the more informed we are, the broader our perspectives, the better our decision making is in terms of processing the experiences that we go through. The fourth one, which is also critical, is the support system. It could be a family, it could be a work team, it could be a friendship circle, it could be a former high school mate. But ultimately, that support system and what that looks like has a lot to do with how you will process grief as an individual, and how at the end of the day you resolve it and hopefully get to that level of acceptance and then moving forward with the grief. Thank you.
Oh, wow, that was so profound. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, like we've actually seen so many cultures where they forbid men to grieve, and of which it is not a right thing to do. So, in whatever culture, we all experience loss, and we are allowed to grieve, and we can grieve in a way that we know is right for us. As we've already mentioned, grief is different for everyone. So, we cannot tell someone how to grieve their loved ones or their loss. So, thank you so much for that. I will ask Ms. Ribab to please finish answering your question. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, my connection was lost. Uh, so I was talking about that how could we understand that our grief is turning into depression, right? As I mentioned before, that there are different symptoms uh, from which we can identify that we are having this grieving period. And of course, there is no such timeline for that grief. Each person carries different grief in their own way, healing in their own way. But if we talk about the symptoms, so some symptoms might get similar. For example, imagine you are unable to play your favorite game, like someone like cricket a lot, but he or she is unable to play the way they used to be because of any injury. Like this sense of incompetency, like I am unable to do this. I used to play it very well, but now I'm unable to do it. Make that person feels like very sad, restless, upset sometime. But this is grief. Grief of this pain, grief of that injury. But if this grief lasts for a long period of time, like as I mentioned before, like 6 months, right? Then it is converting into depression. These feelings, if these feelings linger on, like you are unable to sleep properly, your sleeping pattern get disturbed, your appetite get disturbed, the daily functionings uh, get disturbed, then this is a high time that you need to seek help from the professional. You need to seek help from clinical psychologists, because these grieving period getting longer and it might be turning into depression.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So grieving is a normal process. However, when it has taken too long, then it has become depression, of which a person starts to lose interest in the things that they loved. They don't want to do anything anymore. They don't want to come outside. So when it reaches that point, it is best to seek professional help. So the last question goes to Ms. Judy. Supporting someone who is grieving can be challenging. What advice or guidance can you offer to friends, family, and community members who want to provide meaningful support to those experiencing loss?
So I think it's very important to first approach a person in this situation with empathy and understanding. So one of the first things would be making sure that you listen actively, and this means you're not just lending an ear. You're really listening to understand someone and what they're feeling and their process without judgment. That's a very important thing. No matter what they're feeling, because as was mentioned before, your experience might not be the same as someone else's. You may not be familiar with the way that they are processing their grief, but to just listen and acknowledge how they feel, validify it, that's very important. And then another thing is offering practical help. So something that's that's tangible, something like, okay, would you like me to come help you wash the dishes today? Can I make dinner for you? Can I make lunch for you? It's these small little things that, in a normal everyday situation, you won't realize the impact or how much energy those small things take. But with someone who's grieving, help with that can be so impactful. It can really take a bit of weight off their shoulders. It's one less thing for them to have to worry about. And then also, you've got to respect their process. So this, again, is leading into everyone's experience is different. It's a unique journey for everyone. And so avoid trying to push people into, you need to move on, because everyone's timeline is different. Some people are able to move forward from grief very quickly. Others need a lot of time. So don't be quick to say, but it's been such a long time. No, just say, yes, I'm here, I understand, and how can I help? And then again, it's very important to avoid the cliches, which is things like, that saying, everything happens for a reason. In these moments, it might not be as helpful, because that person isn't really thinking, oh, this happened for a reason. It's a very negative part of process and part of their life. So it's better to offer, genuine condolences and express willingness, like I said, with practical things to help with, like the dishes. And then lastly, it's just very important to keep checking in, regular check-ins, just to see, how you're doing. Continue offering support, no matter how far down the line it may have been. Just having that ongoing presence and understanding, them just knowing that, what, no matter when, this person is there for me, is very important, just to get through the process of grief. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Judy. Uh, as she has mentioned, it actually is difficult sometimes for people to know what to say or what to do to someone who is grieving. So as she has explained, that was quite clear how we can help someone who is grieving. So I will end the webinar with some borrowed words from Jova, and he says, we cannot talk about grief without talking about rage, shame, and guilt. Grief doesn't always come alone. Sometimes it comes with the unfairness of it all, the infuriating tragedy of not being able to forever hold the ones we love. Overnight, life can turn into a disappointing contract we've been forced into, where the terms and conditions state shockingly, wherever there is love, there will be loss. How enraging that is, right? So be careful. Our rage has nowhere to go. It tends to live inwards. And we experience it as shame when we judge ourselves for all the things we could have done differently in a time. And then guilt takes over. And now we have to live with unspoken words burning in our throat, with so much love still raging in our heart. And we get angry at the unfairness of it all. And the cycle of rage, shame, and guilt begins all over again. The good news is that it doesn't have to be this way. Here are four secrets of grief and growth. Loss is not the end of love. We can keep loving, just not in the familiar ways. Maybe truly unconditional this time, where the physical presence is not even a requirement for us to love. Detachment and avoiding love are not antidotes for loss. After all, love is our core essence. It's what we are born to do. It's how we relate, connect, and feel alive. I forgive you, and please forgive me are the other ways of saying the same thing. I love you. Grief is the last responsibility of love. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We do not have questions, so I would like to thank everyone who's taken their time to join this live, and our guests and our tech team. So we say goodbye. We can say bye to everyone. So bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.